Another thing I would like to talk about is the MRA, which means men's rights activists, or some people call them men's rights movement. These are a group of men and women who actually believe that feminism is not speaking for men's rights. So even though feminism gives us the idea that it's all about the equality of the sexes, but this group of people believe that feminism doesn't speak about issues that are actively affecting men. So a lot of feminists believe that this group of people, they are anti-feminists and they are anti-progressives. But I did a bit of research about them, and these are some of the issues that this group is trying to address. Some of the common concerns that the MRA has is the family court system, where men are forced to pay alimony while not considering their feelings when giving custody of children. Another thing is government programs that assist only women instead of both genders. Men tend to suffer the same abuse as women. This has been statistically proven. The right to opt out from raising a child, men don't have this right, and women can easily opt out of a pregnancy by going for an abortion. Another issue the MRA has is false rape accusations, which does not tend to get enough attention because a lot of women that falsely accuse men of raping them actually just go scot-free, even though they commit perjury in the court. Another issue that they have is radical feminism, the intent by radical feminists to destroy the family system. Another thing the MRA actively speaks against is the wage gap myth. This has been debunked severally by so many reputable researchers, but feminists still keep propagating this falsehood that women earn 77 cents compared to $1 that men earn. And how they came about this result was that they calculated all the wages of women and men, and they found the average, and they arrived at 77 cents to $1. But what they failed to tell people is that they neglected looking at the number of hours worked, the occupation, the position, and the types of choices that women make when it comes to their profession. Research was done by the American Association of University Women, and they found out that there is just about 6.6 cents wage gap difference for men and women compared to the 23 cents from the other research, and that wage gap was heavily dependent on the choices made by women. But even after all these researchers have put out these results, feminists still push the story that 77 cents to $1 is what a woman earns. And saying that to anyone, what you actually hear is that also women in the same position as men do not earn the same thing, which is actually a falsehood. Like I said earlier, it's not only men that make up the MRA. They also have women that are actively part of the group. And the interesting thing to know is that women are actually the face of the MRA, because when men tend to speak up for men's rights, the feminists attack them and say they are misogynist or they are traditionalist, women-hating men, or backward-thinking people. So the women have actually taken the mantle and, start speaking up for men's rights. An important person, or an important member of the MRA is Karen Swan. She has actively given a lot of lectures for the Canadian Association for Equality, and she's a recognized MRA. I'd like you to watch this video and listen to her speak.
My name is Karen, and I am an anti-feminist. Yeah. I know, the short hair and the comfortable shoes really gave it away. A lot of people think that we're sort of the women's auxiliary of the men's rights movement, sort of take a back seat and be a good ally. Like, we're not MRA allies, and we're not MRA supporters. We're MRAs. Feminism wants to pretend that men are a monolithic perpetrator class and women are a monolithic victim class, but that just isn't the way it works in the real world. So that's really why I oppose feminism, why I try and, pick it apart and try and do my best to discredit it wherever I can. So
another thing that I'd like to talk about is rape and male victims. Now, we all know that rape is a very bad thing. It's not wanted in the society and nobody supports it. So the MRA, they actively speak against this. But I want you to listen to how the CDC describes or defines rape. Researchers from the CDC, that's the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, try to differentiate between being forced to penetrate and rape. Listen to what they said. Being made to penetrate is a form of sexual victimization distinct from rape that is particularly unique to males and, to our knowledge, has not been explicitly measured in previous national studies. It is possible that rape questions in prior studies captured the experience of being made to penetrate someone else, resulting in high prevalence estimates for male rape in those studies. According to the MRA, this definition is quite harmful because what this means is that due to the anatomy of a man, a woman cannot rape a man. And we know that males penetrate females, so this is actually very false. And another argument they have is that if the story was to be reversed, there would be outrage from the feminists, claiming that they are not trying to protect the rape victim. Fun fact, let's say a woman in her 30s sleeps with a boy of about 13 to 14 years old. This is called statutory rape. But the funny thing about it is that when that boy clocks 18, the woman, that is his rapist, can actually force him to pay for child support, even though he is the victim. So these are some of the issues that the MRA they have, and other issues like stuff like manspreading, mansplaining, a lot of different terminologies that come with the suffix man, and they tend to mean negative connotations. There is a feminist that goes by the name of Cassie J. She has been a feminist for about 10 years, and she thinks of the MRA as misogynist or as people that just lack sense. So she decided to do a documentary about the MRA. She literally believed that these people are enemies, and she decided to, expose them for who they are. So I want you to take a look at this video from our TEDx talk, and we'll continue from there.
In 2013, I decided to meet my enemies. I was a 27-year-old award-winning documentary filmmaker and a proud feminist, and I was determined to expose the dark underbelly of the men's rights movement. At that point, all I knew of the men's rights movement was from what I read online, that it's a misogynistic hate group actively working against women's equality. While the vast majority of my previous work was about women's issues, I directed documentaries about reproductive rights, single motherhood, and the need for more girls to get into STEM education. Well, after years of researching and fact-checking what the men's rights activists were telling me, there is no denying that there are many human rights issues that uniquely or disproportionately affect men. Paternity fraud uniquely affects men. The United States Selective Service, in the case of a draft, still uniquely affects men. Workplace deaths, disproportionately men. War deaths, overwhelmingly men. Suicide, overwhelmingly men. Sentencing disparity, life expectancy, child custody, child support, false rape allegations, criminal court bias, misandry, failure to launch, boys falling behind in education, homelessness, veterans issues, infant male genital mutilation, lack of parental choice once a child is conceived, lack of resources for male victims of domestic violence. So many issues that are heartbreaking if you are the victim or you love someone who is the victim of any one of these issues.
The title of the documentary is called Red Pill, and she actually had feminists and MRA members in that documentary. Everyone was speaking from their own point of view about different issues. And she also kept a journal about how her thoughts were evolving over the period of doing the documentary. And at the end of the whole thing, she actually started believing in men's rights because there were a lot of things that she was not exposed to. In October 2016, the documentary was released and reviews started to pour in. And Cassie got to learn some very vital lessons. She found out that the media is actively involved in playing group politics, that is identity politics. And she found out another thing, which I would read a quote. When you start to humanize your enemy, there is a chance that your community will start to dehumanize you. She started getting verbal attacks from a lot of feminists, even though she was just actually trying to shine more light on men's issues and trying to show that the men's rights movement was actually trying to participate in the equality discussion. So she learned very hard lessons. And the funny thing about it is that a lot of these feminists that were attacking her did not see the movie. They didn't even know what the movie was about. They just believed that since it was, talking about men's issues, definitely it's a men's agenda and is misogynistic in nature. Another woman who is a member of the MRA that I would like to talk about is Erin Peasy. Erin Peasy was born in 1939, and in 1971 she founded the first women's shelter in Chiswick, London. Now the shelter expanded into many houses and it grew into a large organization called the Refuge. She was a very prominent figure in the women's rights in the 1970s. Not long after setting up the first women's shelter, Peasy had to flee England with her kids after there were protests, threats, and violence that accumulated into the shooting of her dog. So eventually she ended up, returning back to England, but she never stopped advocating for victims of domestic violence. And now you might be wondering that how did she all of a sudden start getting threats against her life and all that? Well, what actually happened is that she tried to set up the first men's shelter that is for men that were being abused by their wives. And, she got a lot of threats against her. And the reason being that she is trying to disrupt the narrative of the feminists as then, because they believe that everything relating to violence can only be perpetrated by men. Women are always the victim. But she found that in the course of being with women that came into the women's shelter, she found out that about 60% of the first 100 women that came in were actually violent themselves. And being a victim of domestic violence herself, she had the courage to be able to speak up and, stand her ground that violence is not is not exclusive to men. It can be perpetrated by both men and women. Peasy found out that out of the first 100 women that came into our women's shelter, about 60% of them were as violent as the partners that they were running from. And she didn't believe in the narrative that women are victims, men are perpetrators narrative that the feminists were spreading. According to her, and I quote, we know and everybody in this business knows that both women and men in interpersonal relationships can be violent. Peasy was a victim of domestic violence herself. She mentioned that her mom usually abused her because she looked like her father. She believed that we need to stop the narrative of only men being the aggressors and that women need to start looking at themselves and be honest about their own violence. She also mentioned that domestic violence can actually be traced back to 3 generations, and she actually carried out a survey amongst the women within her shelter, and she found out that a lot of the women that were violent had actually experienced domestic violence, probably from their parents or grandparents. Now, I would like you to listen to what Erin Peasy has to say.
Violence against women, they get something like, it's $1 billion and over a year. And an awful lot of that goes on really supposedly rehabilitating men, but essentially punishing them with something that's called the Duluth model.
That's what Harry was telling me about today, but I haven't heard a lot about that before.
The Duluth model was I think it was Minnesota where it was designed, and essentially before a man he has to apologize for being a man, because behind the radical feminist ideology is that all men are potential batterers and rapists, because it's the patriarchy, it's the Y chromosome. And one of the saddest parts of all this is, from my point of view, is seeing both the children coming in and the terrible damage that's done to both boys and girls. The idea that you can actually say that only boys are affected by domestic violence is actually ludicrous.
Or girls. Only girls?
Well, basically, no, as far as the radical feminist movement are concerned, and the refuge movement's concerned, it's the boys who are going to be potentially the perpetrators and girls who are going to be the victims. But of course, that's rubbish.